Okay, the headlines. Climate action demonstrations have diminished in size, and I was wondering why is that? First, however, let's start with some really great news, and that comes from a very small country, Palau. It's a tiny country in the Pacific. They have an amazing campaign for sustainable travel or responsible travel. It's called Ol'au Palau. So you tread lightly, you sign a pledge, and this will give you points. They will give you exclusive cultural experiences that others can only dream about. What they're saying is even starting small, like using reef-safe sunscreen, will see you reaping rewards. Now, the great thing is it's already being replicated in 2 other nations. So great stuff. If you like this program, please hit that button subscribe and hit that button like, and I do appreciate that. Now, some not so great news. Al Jazeera is saying must be credible. Energy giants are challenged over climate action. They are saying, despite a series of new targets set by the top 15 global energy firms, most are still not pledging an absolute cut in emissions. Carbon Tracker reported that energy firms reinvest some of the funds from asset sales into new oil and gas production, thus creating more emissions. Not good. So diminishing crowds at climate action demonstrations. Why? Well, the war Ukraine-Russia, one factor that contributes to new sources of oil and gas production. We just came out of COVID, but we're not really out. As a matter of fact, myself, I just recovered from this awful disease last week. We have China, other nations having very strict lockdowns directly impacting the world economy and thereby climate action. Happening right now, as a matter of fact, North Korea admits its first ever COVID death as explosive outbreak is linked to a huge parade, and that country has absolutely zero vaccination program. So basically, it's not finished yet. People are not thinking about the climate. They're thinking about how to put gas in their car, how they're going to get through wintertime. Politico is actually saying climate goes missing in action in Russia's war. And they talk about Europe's scramble to secure more LNG, and that could divert fuel away from poorer importing nations. And instead, they have to turn to coal. So, number one priority? No, not anymore. CBC.ca even says that oil and gas will be around a lot longer than some think, that despite climate change goals. According to a bank in Canada, RBC Bank, economist Colin Guldimann, climate change is still a priority, but there is not as much momentum as compared to 6 months ago after the UN climate conference. He also mentions, I think, countries are going to struggle to switch their energy systems over to ones that are non-emitting extremely quickly. But more on that next time around. In the end, what is it we can actually focus on? Well, Prince Charles and others are focusing on methane. And Prince Charles is focusing on cows and methane. And he was mocked for that. He was mocked for backing an initiative that would see part of methane emitted by cows converted into CO2 and water vapor via converter-fitted masks for cows. Okay, more bad news. BBC. Phantom forests are being used for greenwashing. What are they talking about? Well, 1 billion hectares of landscape that countries have promised remain no more than a promise rather than a reality. And I quote, sometimes these forests exist on paper only because promises have not been kept or because planted trees have died or even have been harvested. Now, they investigated a number of countries and a number of examples, and they flopped because insufficient care was taken. Many of the plantations have been only promotional events. They're talking about India, Philippines, and they're talking about Mozambique. And I think it's really, really sad. I love the idea of planting trees, replanting trees. Maybe they should put more money into preservation of the existing forest, especially rainforest. Looking at the Amazon, deforestation of Amazon in Brazil surges to a record new high. Anyhow, Climate Action Group and the diminishing amount of people involved, Extinction Rebellion vowing to send millions of people onto the streets in defiance of new government crackdown on guerrilla protests. And I went to one of these protests. 3, 4 years ago, before the pandemic, I was at Buckingham Palace, a demonstration from Extinction Rebellion, and it was absolutely packed. It was massive, tens of thousands of people. Last year at the UN COP meeting, I was at a demonstration here in London, and it was just a couple of hundred. Then Earth Day 2022, demonstration here in front of the headquarters of Vanguard in London. It's an investment company, and according to the protesters, was investing way too much money into fossil fuel companies.
Vanguard is a subsidiary of BlackRock, and it's one of the world's biggest investors in fossil fuels.
Now, not that many people there, maybe 30, maybe 40, some really interesting characters though, I have to say. Here's one of them.
SustainaClaus is, well, this character, parents particularly, who celebrate this tradition, why aren't they SustainaClaus? They should be, right? It'll make their lives a whole lot easier. Math is the real world of checks and balances. If you take too much carbon out of the earth and you put it in the air, that's a mathematical problem.
Just now I went to a protest, Just Stop Oil. Let's just find out why they were here.
So quite recently, 14 of our activists, ordinary people, they've been put into prison for trying to tell the government that they need to act on the climate crisis. These are ordinary people, you've got teachers, nurses, just ordinary people, and the government has decided to imprison them because it's easier to silence the people ringing the alarm than it is to deal with the crisis, because they'd actually have to target the oil companies and the people destroying our climate.
And well, again, there's not that many people, maybe 90.
I think that in this day and age, like the sort of paradox on social media is that everything's massive.
Yeah.
So things get smaller and bigger and smaller and bigger. 200?
Well, lady says 200, but I think it's maximum 100. Why is there such a small amount of people when this is so important?
Definitely COVID had a big effect on people's participation. It's taken a while to come back, and of course the government is using scare tactics. More and more often they're arresting people without reason, they're putting in draconian laws to try and avoid people to protest. And of course people are going to be affected by that. Some people are going to be scared.
I think it's weird. Don't people care anymore about climate change, or have they just had enough? Do activists irritate people a little bit too much by disrupting traffic, gluing themselves to the roads and to government buildings? Is there just too much bad publicity around these groups? Or is that something else? Is it just COVID? Or maybe they are too left-wing?
Fueled really by capitalism, by this system of the wealthy countries exploiting for profit, for resources.
So the people that are all over the world who are starving now because of our greedy system.
They're not people, they're corporations.
Are they perhaps, in my eyes, going against their own companies and organizations? Should they not go against the government? It's the government that makes the ultimate decisions. It's the government that's going to drill in the North Sea.
So it's a mixture of both. I mean, the UK doesn't have a direct democracy, so we elect our officials and then they vote on our behalf. But as we've seen time after time, people are often very unhappy with the decisions that are made. We've seen that throughout the years. You've got like the petrol protests back in the early 2000s. So it's very clear that the government doesn't always act in the interest of the people, and quite often they're acting in the interest of their own pockets, because we know that the oil companies are donating massive amounts of money to the government, which is traceable and has been seen to happen.
By the way, I did ask for a response from Vanguard, but no one got back to me, which is not really a good sign. Next time, I talk about banks in Canada. They're facing greenwashing claims, and also they are taking advantage of the situation, saying they can invest in oil and gas at the same time reach net zero.